Hello, this is Scott Hansen with the Dell Enterprise Technology Center. Today we will demonstrate the Dell Repository Manager, which allows you to create custom repository for your Dell server updates. We are now looking at the Dell Repository Manager screen. We will first import a repository. We will create a new repository, put a name, R610. This is for the R610s that are in our lab. And we can select ftp.dell.com for the repository to pull the updates. When we select Next, this will allow us to customize for which form factor, which operating system, we'll select both, and then which model of server, so we can narrow down our repository to contain just updates for the R610. Here we can select the bundles for the latest bundles and the last revision of the bundles. And there are also additional components that are not in the system bundles. We'll go ahead and look at these components. This contains many additional updates, previous versions of firmware, tape drive firmware, lots of updates. So we will not include these components at this time for a shorter repository, smaller repository. So now we have the summary of what our repository is. We'll click Finish. And now this will create a repository that we can work with. So here we see the bundles that are included in this repository, and these bundles contain several components in the bundles. So we can click on Components and see all the components that are listed in these bundles for all 4 bundles that we originally selected. So wealth of information, we can sort the columns. If I click on Date, I can arrange by date. If I select an individual bundle, it will show just the components in that bundle. So these are the Dell update packages, the dupes, that are contained in that bundle. So right now we just have one repository loaded, the R610, gives us the information on the components. If we add additional repositories, we can do comparisons. So we'll load some existing repositories. I have one that I've created for 11G blades that are in our lab. So we'll load this repository. And then we can also add the repository from ftp.dell.com, so we'll add that one as well. Now that we have these repositories loaded, we can compare. So we can pick a base repository, we'll pick our 11G blades, and we'll compare that to the repository that's on ftp.dell.com with the latest updates. We can look at the newer versions, change files, updates to add and remove. Now when we look at this report, we'll see that our base is again the 11G blades, and we're comparing it to ftp.dell.com. So we'll see I created this a while back, so there are some differences, some newer versions from the base. If I want to update my base repository, I can simply select all the files, or I can select individual components to update the repository. So I'll select 2 there, click Update, and now they are in my 11G blades base repository. This simply updates the repository or the XML file. It does not update the components until you actually export, which we'll see later on. So this also will show all the updates that are not in my current base repository, as well as additional updates. These are all the additional components that I chose not to select in the very beginning, which I could add now if I wanted to. You can also sort, again, by date. You could also click the comparison report and export this to XML if you wish. So we'll close this. So now let's look at some of the oh, and don't forget to save. It's not intuitively obvious. When you make a change, you'll want to click the Save button. So now let's take a look at some of the searching capabilities. We can save filters, and they will show up in this drop-down menu simply by clicking Save Filter. And there are many search filter capabilities. We can simply do a simple text search, 2950. This will show us all of the bundles for the 2950 on ftp.dell.com. Clear filter will bring us back to the base. We can do by driver type, BIOS, firmware, applications. We can also search by criticality, optional, recommended, or urgent. We can select by form factor, rack, tower, blade. These are some of the options that you saw in the initial importing of the repository. We can also look at component version, operating system restrictions, where we can select Windows or Linux. All of these boxes are also shift and control selectable, so I can select one or more using the control key. And again, you see this updates on the right hand side in real time. We can also look by supported platforms. These are all of our PowerEdge servers going pretty far back. Everything that's on ftp.dell.com in the catalog. And again, we can control and shift select for multiple servers. It also has a list of all of the devices, so you can get very granular. And of course, you can sort by date, exact dates prior to or the most recent updates. And we can also get very specific and search on PCI device information. Alright, so we'll clear that filter. Alright, so now let's look at some specifics. I have a 2970 in the lab that I need to do some updates on, so let me select the 2970 and we will export the specific bundle, and we will export this to a new repository so that we can work with it. This will show you how we can create repositories off of other repositories. So I'll name this one 2970, give it a description, and click next, and it will give us a summary. We'll finish, and now we have a new repository with that single bundle of components. So if we click on that, we'll see that we have that single bundle. Click on components, we'll see there's 80 individual updates in that bundle. I don't want to apply all 80 updates. We could, but we will just sort by type and actually select the BIOS and the backplane firmware. And one nice thing about the components, if you hover over, you'll get the full description for the dupe package. So we'll select these two components and we will export these as a bundle within this repository. So I'll select next. We will export as a new bundle inside this repository. This is necessary in order to create the ISOs or the update packages for lightweight deployment. They key off of bundles and not individual components. So we first have to take these components and create a bundle. So this will be a custom bundle inside this repository. So you can see it in the drop down. We look at the bundle. There was our name, and we can give it specific versions for our own versioning purposes. We can now export this as either a raw driver pack, a lightweight deployment script, or an ISO file. So we'll do it as a lightweight deployment script since this server is up. And we can apply these updates from within Windows. So we'll export this to a share that the 2970 can see. So we'll drill down, downloads, demos. Make a new folder, 2970 BIOS. Select OK and finish. And this will take the individual components and save it in the file that we just created. So the export was successful. So now let's take a look at the 2970 that's in the lab. We'll simply drill down to the same share and folder that we saved to. So demos and 2970 BIOS, and you see the apply components.batch file and the two dupes. So if we look at this batch file, you'll see that it simply runs the dupe package with the /s for a silent install and a /l to write the output to a log file, apply components.log. So now we simply have to run this batch file. So drill down to where it is. Apply components.bat. Since it's a silent install, it won't give much input or output here, but it does write to the log file. So let's look at the log file. We see that the first one we actually have the current firmware. That tells us that we can force it with the /F. And if we go down further, the second BIOS update, it collects the inventory, runs the validation, and we see that it executed from 303 to 404, although it needs a reboot. So it says update ready to be applied at reboot. And if you scroll down further, it will say the exit code of 2, reboot required. So now on the reboot of this machine, it will apply the latest BIOS. So thank you for watching the Dell Repository Manager demo. If you have further questions, please go to www.deltechcenter.com.